And we are live. Welcome, community, Flagstaff, regional, state, international, national. Welcome, all peoples. Thank you so much for joining us for the second day of the Lived Black Experiences. Kwanzaa celebration, which typically is hosted at our Murdoch Community Center, which is our tribal community home. And because we want to keep everyone safe and healthy and happy, we thought that it was best to do for this second year Kwanzaa, celebrate Kwanzaa via live stream. And so here we are. And on top of that, it's a little blustery out there today here in Flagstaff, and we're off and on with snowstorm warnings and heavy winds. So it's very nice to be able to be at home and be relaxed and to celebrate this very special holiday. And so this is our second day, and today, as I was sort of reflecting on Kwanzaa and last evening, and by the way, thank you all for viewing. I think we had about 139 uh, people to join us on last evening. So thank you. And so right now we're just beginning. If you would tell a friend and that one friend would share with a friend, then perhaps we can have an even bigger or larger celebration this evening. But today, as I was reflecting on last evening and giving thought to uh, why we're coming back today for day two, I came across a message from Dr. Karinga. Every year, he gives a special message, a special Kwanzaa message, and he's the founder. He is the founder of Kwanzaa. And so this year, the 2021 theme of Kwanzaa is practicing Kwanzaa and the seven principles, ensuring the well being of the world. And so Kwanzaa, as he was saying in his message, it's a Pan African holiday. We know that we're beginning to learn that for those who have not uh, been familiar with Kwanzaa up until now. And as we talked about last evening, Kwanzaa is steeped in this ancient agricultural origins. So it really is not that much of a new concept. When Dr. Karinga came up with this in 1966, um, our people in the mother country, Akibalan, Africa, they were already, there's always this time of the year, big celebrations as they're bringing in the harvest that will feed the tribes, feed the communities, feed everyone for the next coming year. And so Kwanzaa celebrates the good of the earth, and it carries within it a commitment to protect, to preserve, and to share this good. And so, in thinking about that, and thinking about the message, and it's out there. I'll try to get it up there while we're celebrating. One of the things that he said is that Kwanzaa's modern origins in the Black freedom movement commits it to the achievement of liberation and social justice. And so last evening we acknowledged the first of seven principles, Yesterday, we acknowledged Umoja, which is community. And we use that word so often in the Lived Black Experience Project. And so, as I was thinking about what we talked about on last evening, I mentioned about community being that place where individuals become. I mentioned becoming, coming into ourselves. But today I gave deeper thought to that, that community is definitely all about belonging. So becoming and belonging, very much the place where it happens is within the community. And so today we're here to talk about the second principle. And I'm not going to give it away. We have a beautiful guest who just happens to be a regular here on our Lived Black Experience community dialogue. Dr. Treya Allen, she is a phenomenal woman. And we're always so happy to have her to come and share the knowledge that she shares with us on, and she's been here with us for the last 2 years with on so many different topics about women, about education. Also, it all comes back to about being and belonging. And so she's here to help us celebrate our second principle. For those of you, if she is new to you, she is a professor at the University of Arizona. She's doing a great work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is also a work of belonging. And I'm just so excited to have her here. And I'm going to bring her in. There she is. Hi, sister.
Hello, hello.
So I should have said at the beginning, but I'll say it to you and to everyone that's joining us. Heri za Kwanzaa. Happy Kwanzaa.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
was I thought you were going to say Habari Ghani, and I was going to give you the today's principle.
Well, that's what you're here to do. So, and we're so excited to have you here. And so we're not going to prolong it. With that being said, please take us into day 2 of our celebration.
Absolutely. Well, happy Kwanzaa, everyone, and everyone who's coming to this platform, whether you're learning live with us or you'll join us on our rebroadcast that will be situated, I believe, on our new Facebook page and YouTube. Today's principle is Kujichagulia. And basically, I'm going to use Dr. Karinga's words to explain what that is. The most basic definition of this is a commitment and a practice that demands that we as an African people define, defend, and develop ourselves instead of allowing or encouraging others to do this. Kujichagulia, in the most basic sense, means self-determination, but there are parts to this self-determination. So Dr. Karinga goes on to note that this principle teaches us we must think and act for ourselves and define ourselves by the good we choose to do in the world. With that definition, it also means that we have a right and a responsibility to be ourselves and free others and ourselves and make our own unique contribution to the radical reimagining and remaking of our societies and world. It also stresses that we have a moral obligation to reaffirm and support this right for others. I believe that one of our great ancestors, Toni Morrison, who you'll hear a little bit from in a minute, also says the same thing. But she says it this way: as we become free, it is our right it is our duty, it is our responsibility to then free others, to then empower others to do the same. Because for those who are oppressed or struggling for freedom, those who are wronged and injured and struggling for justice, and those who are disempowered and struggling for power over their destiny and daily lives, as we become the whole self-determined people that we have always been and always been destined to be, it is our responsibility to then return in kind to others who may have experienced or may be currently experiencing oppression, disempowerment, whether that is physically, mentally, or spiritually. Now, for most people, we say self-determination, but where exactly does that come from? I want to let you know that if you belong to any Black community the world over, this idea of self-determination is not something that is new. In fact, we know that it has been around for some time. There are actually three parts to being a self-determined people. One is this idea of being able to name your existence, and name the things in your society, to give definition. There's an African proverb that says, until the lions have their own historians, history will always privilege, the tale of the hunter. Quite simply put, unless we are willing to actually name our existence, to define it for ourselves, instead of passing that off or believing what people say about us, then we will continue to always be a certain image, a certain perspective, a certain group of people defined by certain ways in whatever society that we may find ourselves. In naming, this idea of naming goes back to even before, if you are from the Christian faith, there's this idea of God allowing Adam to name the things in the garden that were around him and giving him dominion, right? So once you start naming things, you get to dominate or have dominion or have authority over it. Another part of self-determination is this idea of defining, right? So I get to give definition to that which I have named. So not only do I have the authority to name and to see and to be who I desire, I get to tell myself what that definition is. So there's a great scholar and a dear mentor, Dr. Yaba Blay. Please look her up on social media, who really talks about this idea of definition and who gets to define the work of our hands and the work of our lives. Will we allow someone else to give meaning to that, or will we pick up, that which is around us to name and define what is in our hands? I also want to, follow that up with, there's this third part of self-definition, this idea of recalling and remembering. And as Sister Kara said last night, during the first night of Kwanzaa, this idea of Sankofa, where we go back to these principles, right? Because nothing that we're doing here has not been done before, but we go back and we pick up what has been dropped to bring it forward into our present and then beyond into our future. Toni Morrison, who is an ancestor now, had this wonderful novel called Beloved. And Beloved was really the story of, or the rememory of Margaret Turner's side of the events. Now, for those of y'all who do not know who Margaret Turner is, Margaret Turner was an enslaved woman who crossed the Ohio River from Kentucky going into Ohio for her husband and her children, and unfortunately was recaptured, but decided that she was not going to go back into enslavement, and neither were her children. And so while this gets a little gory here, she decided it better to send her children on to be ancestors rather than to allow them to endure the act itself. Her ability to define and to claim and name what the natural state of her children would be was something that was unheard of. So Toni Morrison honors her by telling her side of the story through what she calls a practice of rememory, of going back to understand and going back to pick up the side of the story that we don't often hear. When you look at historical documents, all we see is the outrage from the dominant culture about Margaret Turner's action. But in Beloved, Toni Morrison does something very unique. She gives voice not only to this mother who had to make this very troubling decision, but also to the daughter as well. And so what I would say to that is in giving voice, right? Beloved is quite the novel. So if you have not read it, please do so. But in giving voice and going back to rememory, this idea of going back to remember the things that we have lost or things that have been laid aside, or what we would call Sankofa, I I want to employ all of us to do just the same things in our own lives. What are the things that we have laid aside, whether it is ancestral knowledge, the things that are hidden deep within us that we have to go back and resurrect so that we can have better futures, so that we can determine and name our existence and name the lives that we want to have. But I think more importantly, and more so than just naming and defining and recalling, once we get to the point where we can self-define, we become workers of liberation for other people. So by me being my true, authentic, nerdy self who loves history, and bringing forth my history, whether it be ancestral or cultural history, once I do all of this, I give permission for other people to do the same, right? So if I can just quote another ancestor, Lucille Clifton. Lucille Clifton was a poet, a Black woman, and grew up in Buffalo, New York, just recently passed in 2010. Well, I don't know if that's recent, it's like 11 years ago, but she has this poem called Won't You Celebrate With Me? And so the poem simply just states, won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. I was born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed, right? And so if you know anything about Lucille Clifton, she writes a lot about the African-American experience, the African-American woman's experience in the United States. But what I really love about this poem is Lucille is telling all of us, this great ancestor, that every day I woke up and I was determined to be my own role model, to define for myself what this life would be, to shape an existence that was not supposed to be available to me. It also reminds me of another quote by Marianne Williamson, who is a teacher, a Christian faith-based teacher, who has this amazing, quote about being our authentic selves as well. And so Marianne Williamson says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, to be gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I can think of no other amazing way to think about how, even through when we say self-determinism, how even our ancestors brought here in chains, forcibly kidnapped, treated below humanity, denied humanity, still carved out for themselves as a form of existence radical spaces of joy, of community, of purpose, even in the midst of trauma. So one of our living historians, Dr. Skip Gates, talks about how they cultivated for themselves a culture that would outlast even the noise of dominant society telling them what they were. Dr. Yaba Blay follows up this amazing speech by saying, we are given race. Race is what we are told we are, but it is our culture that explains and proclaims to the world who we define ourselves to be and who we are. It is our opportunity to tell the world who we are and not accept the limitations of a very socially constructed thing that we call race. So on this day and following into 2022, I hope that you take the time to sit down and ask yourself some key questions. Who am I? Am I who I say that I am? And am I who I ought to be? Ensuring us that we're going back and picking up our culture, picking up the things that we have maybe dropped off in the past, and bringing them into our present so that we have a self-determined future. And with that, I'm going to invite Reverend Lewis back.
Wow. And just as last evening, the only response I had after Sister Kara, and it's the same this evening, Amen, Amin, Amun, and Amen. Wow, and wow. Um, you have definitely spoken very well to what self-determination is. And I want to ask you because when Dr. Karenga was doing this in 1966, self-determination, he said, was we were seeking uh, the power, the liberation, to define ourselves, um, to name ourselves, to create for ourselves, and to speak for ourselves.
Yes.
Where do you think we are now? Where do you think we are on that? Please speak to us.
I do think that we create for ourselves. I think our creation is long-standing, ever renewing. So I often think about it's so funny, Black TikTok creators and how we take even the most mundane and we turn it into a walk, a stride, just something that expresses to the world that we are here and we're glorious, right? I was in the car the other day with my girls, and I was expressing to them the brilliance of Negro spirituals and how even now when we think about how prevalent these spirituals were, and when you had the Fish Jubilee singers who were singing, some of these spirituals, how some of the some of the reviews where they felt the very presence of a living creator in the room, right? And in that living creator being in the room, they start to recognize that I too am endowed with these various gifts. So whether that definition is I will be the best mom that I can be, I will lay down toxic habits in order to raise full actualized beings. I will be the best dancer. I will take the scraps that are given to me and create masterpieces. I see it all around us. I think the part that sometimes that goes unannounced is that there are so many ways of being that we have been limited, or we have believed the lie that we can only be one thing. And that's not true at all, right? So no, we don't parent the same way. My parenting style may not be the same as other people's parenting style. My scholarship may not be the same, but what I do know is that this beautiful tapestry, the self-awareness that I have, right? Because part of self-definition, according to Dr. Karenga, is also understanding that I have a role to play in this world, that I am supposed to help create and add to the uniqueness of our society. And I see that everywhere. And I see it on TikTok, and I see it on Instagram. I see it in my students and the various places that they come from. So we have not stopped doing this, but we could perhaps use more elders who point us in the direction of eye opening and being more aware of the brilliance that we carry. More affirmation from our sisters and brothers. We chant the A and the O, and that boy good, right? And so, can we in 2022 recognize and uncover the true story of who we are and help our brothers and sisters to see the same? And once we have done that for ourselves, right? So here comes the responsibility piece. I have a responsibility to say to others, you're dope too. I see how you're putting these things together. So I still think it's there. I think that we have never stopped creating. I think what's missing is probably sometimes the affirmation and us reaffirming people, right? Because we don't all have to be the same, nor should we.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is why, the more the deeper that I get into this work and into the study of this current focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the more I realize that we're not doing a new work. And it really is not such a complicated work as most would make it to be. In talking about diversity and well, more so inclusion, and when we're talking about community and what we're doing here with the Lived Black Experience Project. And I mentioned earlier in my comments about how now, Dr. Karinga is imagining that Kwanzaa is a commitment to achieving liberation and social justice. And so I want to ask you, because, I always like to say we do this to educate, to inform, and to enlighten. And we're always asking our European American brothers and sisters to come in and be a part of what we are doing. What say you on how do we include our European American brothers and sisters in this striving, in this goal of achieving liberation and social justice, as it is for we as people of African descent living here in America?
This is going to sound real backwards, but I think the work starts with us, right? Part of it is one, having a knowledge of self, being aware of the gifts and the unique standings. Yes, I will not deny anyone the atrocities that have happened in this country. But I think one of the bigger things that happen is that we don't have knowledge of self and knowledge of our own history, right? So then how can we then reach across the aisle or reach out to other cultures and communities if we are not firmly grounded in our own? Because if we're not grounded in our own, we will accept the definitions, the limited definitions that come out of ignorance, whether it be willful or woeful, that others place on Africans in America or Africans in Brazil or in the Caribbean. So I think the first thing is knowledge of self. The second thing I think of is, if we are really talking about bringing people into this work of liberation, without a knowledge of self, we don't understand that as we were once bound, whether it be by ignorance, lack of knowledge of self or history, right? As we were once bound, we have to give that opportunity of enlightenment to other humans, regardless of the shell that they sit in. So for me, it comes down to this. If I say I believe in a creator that is all knowing and all loving and everywhere, how dare I say that my fellow brother or sister is not redeemable? Because once I say they're not redeemable, I deny them of their humanity and I switch places with them. Now, this comes out of a very radical ethic called love, right? And that's not something that we're out here like, ah. We have theory on top of theory, but if the basic thing is for us to be good humans and to be caretakers one to another, how can I do that without knowledge of self? Because honestly, sometimes it be your own and sometimes it be you, right? So I tell my students all the time, 65% of the time I'm great. 35% of the time I need to take a nap. I need to go and get more knowledge because I'm operating at a deficit in some area. And so I think when we're talking about let's bring other people in, the first part of that is let's bring ourselves in first. Have we interrogated the things that are within us? Why is my first response to someone who's dating someone outside of their race or someone who wants to come to the cookout, if you will, why is that malice based? Or they can't do that, or why am I assuming those things? Now, some people may disagree with me, but what I have found in studying Dr. King's beloved community is that unless we all go, none of us are free.
Mm-hmm.
None of us.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to be selectively bound, right? Blinded by the fact that I think that I have more than you, or do we really want to work towards liberation for all people? And
Mm-hmm.
if the latter is the case, then it has to start with me first. Then I can reach out, being firmly rooted in my own culture and my history, understanding what my real motive is here, right? With the base of everything should be love when we're doing this work. Then I can reach out. Then it becomes easier for me to educate the ignorance rather than to condemn someone for not knowing.
Yeah. So I get it. I get it. I get it 100% where what you're saying. And at the same time, because if our one of our European American brothers or sisters are watching this, one of the questions that I often hear when we're having these types of conversations is, so, but how can I help? What do I need to do? How do I need to show up? And so, what would you tell our European American brothers and sisters? How do they need to show up? How do they need to be present in um, in this movement of achieving liberation and social justice?
It starts with them. Like it's all man in the mirror, regardless of where you're starting in this process. Before I can fully show up for you in any way, I have to first show up for myself. Do I know my history? Have I interrogated who I am? Have I sat with the hard thing? Right? It's sometimes hard for me to acknowledge that by virtue of my aesthetics, I know I have a white ancestor. That might be hard for some people to sit with, right? And in order for us to be an ally or whatever we're calling it here, in order for you to do this work, you have to do truth work first, which starts internally. Do you know your ancestry? Do you know what that means? What does it mean for you to be um, uh, coming from your ancestry coming from Britain? Are we willing to sit with the history of Britain? what is the story of how you came to this land? Are we willing to sit with the history of robbing people of their lands by violence, reinforcing dominance by violence, right? And even if it is not, let's say, because the other thing that I kind of hear someone tapping on my shoulder saying, but that was my ancestors, it wasn't me. James Baldwin says we are not divorced from our history,
That's right.
and to deny it makes us criminals, right? So, in doing this work, it also means that I have to sit and grapple with, well, what is my history, and how did my history, one, advantage me, and then how does it disadvantage me, right? Because we talk a lot of things about this black white binary, but sometimes we need to do internal searching as well, because sometimes we can internalize that. And so I say for anyone who's trying to do liberation work, whether it's the increasing of equity or working towards equity, if it's the increase of inclusion and diversity, right? Asking those critical questions. What's my motive? What am I gaining here? Um, why do I want diverse spaces, and who's going to benefit, and what am I willing to give up to make sure that that happens? What am I willing to give up to sit in a room to do this work? What is it going to take for me? And am I willing to interrogate the feelings that pop up when some of our brothers and sisters explain what their experience is like? Um, and that experience comes with generations and generations of distrust and misuse, right?
Yeah.
Am I willing to make recompense for the sins of the father? Am I willing to sit with what that may mean? And I think this is for everyone, right?
Mhm.
Because
Yes.
even though racism is uniquely experienced here in the United States in ways that it's not experienced other places, there are still forms of oppression that are very similar, like tribalism. That I, being of Yoruba background, have more prominence over other people. That I, being a Senegalese person who happens to speak French, have more clout in a society than someone who speaks Wolof, right? So this idea is not new. It just has a different form. And if I'm not willing to interrogate that before I come sit at the table, well, then I will bring all those nasty habits from generations past, and they will come very much like ancestors and sit in the room with me. And I
Yes.
will be entitled, right? Regardless of what my skin tone is, because my ancestors didn't do that. How can you expect me to apologize and make recompense for it while still experiencing the benefits of that ancestral activity and behavior?
Yes. And so this is why this I think you've made an excellent defense of this is why Kwanzaa uh, can now, I know in the past it's been, primarily just a holiday for African Americans, but I think you've made a very strong defense on why Kwanzaa should be for all Americans, why all Americans should celebrate Kwanzaa. And today, self determination, it's very personal. And I hear what you're saying. It has to start with self first, and then with the community coming together, then it becomes the we ourselves, and how we're living, how we're going to live this truth, this reality as what would then be true community. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And so with that being said, um, hold on, I think I'm probably getting some questions. So I do. We're getting some questions from the audience. Is the heart of racism tribalism?
No, so tribalism and racism are very two different expressions of this idea that we call white supremacy, right? If if you do not understand that a child who is in poverty who cannot eat is the same form of oppression as someone who is being held back because of their skin color, or somebody who's being held back because of the class, whether they're from the Vanderbilts or the Hatchfields. If we don't understand that all of these things are forms of oppression that keep us from actually, watch this, because self-determination is not just about naming my experience, it's also about calling out and naming the thing that is harming our communities as
Mm-hmm.
well. So
Mm-hmm.
we, like, race is very it's a unique expression here in the United States, right? Racism is racism, but in the United States we built an entire nation off of it. We didn't allow people humanity for a very long time, and I think our history books will actually show us that Black people in this country have never wanted to get even. They've wanted what belongs to them. That's very significant. Now, you'll see tribalism when you get into some communities, and especially communities that have been impacted by colonization, whether it is European or Arabization of Northern Africa. This is where you get a lot of tribalism that comes in place. Our tribe is more worthy than your tribe, and so forth and so on. I think that's where you're going to find that. But in this country that was built on the edicts of an oppression, of racism specifically, if we do not name the thing, if we don't name it and clearly define it, and then clearly defend what we will not accept from our communities, then we will continue to rehash it over and over and over again. Um, so I think, and Reverend Lewis, you said something that was really key here, that it's not just about an individual thing. I am an individual, yes, but I belong to multiple communities. So
Yes.
as I become healed, as I become loving, as I gain an understanding, that understanding goes back to a community-based knowledge and that collective knowledge of a community. And this
Mm-hmm.
is so important for us to understand, because no man is an island at all. And even as we are talking about these principles, the principles can't just live in my heart. There has to be a commitment and an expression towards the communities that I'm in. And so I don't just belong to a Black community. I belong to the Northern Arizona University community. I belong to the University of Arizona community. And so what is it that I can do to, like, infuse these concepts in my practice, in my policies, in my procedures, that then will shift the way that my community, right? Enough of us, it takes a little rudder to steer a huge ship. So what can I do in my practices? How do I model this? How do I demonstrate a consistent commitment to the practice of these principles in everyday life? Not just self-determination, but also, like, the improvement of my community, whether that community be my immediate family, or the Allen line, or the Williams line, or, the university line, or the Africana Studies students that I work with. So I think that's even more important than just the individual expression. Because by
Yes.
self, I can't move a mountain by myself, but my community, oof, history tells me that we can move mountains and nations.
Exactly. Exactly. And this is exactly why um, Kwanzaa needs to be celebrated by everyone. And certainly the Lived Black Experience project, we recognize that. And this is why we're here a few times a month having these not so easy conversations, but yet they are necessary conversations that will help to build and strengthen the community. And so indeed, just like our spiritual lives. We have to first be in relationship, that relationship with self and whomever you acknowledge as your higher self, as that
Mhm.
creator. And then what typically happens is that that energy, that spirit, that force will bring those like-minded people together. And as you said, once we come together, then there is no limit to what we
Amen.
together can accomplish. And so, with that being said, because that is self determination, and with self determination, uh, we do build Umoja, a strong community. And so, bless you, sister, for bringing uh, the deep wisdom that you always show up and share with us. Blessed are our viewers this evening. Thank you again for coming and celebrating with us. We will be back tomorrow for day 3 with another surprise guest. And bless each and every one of you. And please take these principles, incorporate them into your everyday life, because that's the theme of Kwanzaa for this year, that we should be practicing Kwanzaa and the 7 principles to ensure the well being of this
Amen.
world. And so, with that, we're very grateful to light the second candle for this year's Kwanzaa celebration. We light this candle for our self determination, for us defining ourselves, naming and renaming ourselves, creating for ourselves and creating ourselves, and speaking for ourselves. We light the candle, and we're very grateful in our hearts to be here this evening. We'll be back tomorrow evening at 6. Please share the word with a friend. And until then, go and be blessed.